I am going to tell you about the morning. Lord Dunbar arrived at Pemberton House with a letter of introduction in his breast pocket, and walked straight past the woman he had come to court, without knowing her for who she was, and how that single, breathtaking mistake became the finest thing that ever happened to either of them. It was October of 1879. The sky over Yorkshire had that low pewter look it gets when the season is turning for good, and Lord Fletcher Dunbar, 5th Earl of Dunbar, had ridden the morning train from London with his jaw set and his mind on money. That is the truth of it, and I will not dress it up for you. He was thinking about money. He was 36 years old, and he had the kind of face that photographers love, and people find either distinguished or insufferable, depending on how he chose to use it. Dark hair going silver at the temples, a bearing that filled rooms without trying, and an old title that opened doors his nearly empty bank account could no longer unlock on its own. His estate in Northumberland, Dunbar Hall, 600 acres, in his family since before the Revolution, was mortgaged 3 times over. His father had been a generous man who had expressed that generosity primarily through debt. His 2 younger brothers, Clement and Hugh, were recent university graduates with no prospects and a touching faith that Fletcher would sort everything out. He had been sorting everything out for 4 years. He was by October of 1879 very tired of sorting. His solicitor had laid it plain the month before. There was one way out, and it was the oldest way in the book. He needed to marry an heiress. Not just any heiress, the right one with enough to clear the mortgages and leave something standing, and the unmistakable heir of a woman, and a name had been put forward carefully with the particular delicacy men of business use when they are suggesting something that makes them slightly uncomfortable. Miss Adeline Pemberton of Pemberton House, Leeds, 31 years old, unmarried, sole heir to Pemberton & Sons, the largest wool trading firm in the West Riding, worth, by conservative estimate, a sum that made Fletcher's thoughts go very quiet when he sat with it. The solicitor had added, in the same careful voice, that Miss Pemberton had been on the market, so to speak, for 3 years since her father's death, and had not yet accepted any offer. This might mean she was particular. It might also mean— the solicitor did not quite finish the thought— that she was the sort of woman a man took for her money, and counted himself fortunate afterward. Fletcher had not liked the implication. He was a proud man, and pride has its uses, but he had also looked at his brothers' faces across the dinner table the week before, full of quiet trust, and he had written the civil letter, and he had taken the train. So that is who arrived at Pemberton House that October morning. Not a villain, not a schemer. A man who had run out of other choices and was not yet reconciled to the one that remained. He came up the gravel drive in a hired cab, and the housekeeper, a stout, composed woman named Mrs. Keene, met him at the door and showed him into the front hall while his bags were seen to. The hall was warm and quietly prosperous, good rugs, a fire already lit, flowers arranged by someone with a real eye for it, and at the writing table beneath the east window, with her back half turned and a stack of invoices spread before her, and a pen moving steadily across a column of figures, sat a young woman in a plain dark dress. She was perhaps 30, perhaps a year or 2 past it, with dark hair pinned up efficiently and a small ink stain on the side of her left hand. She did not look up when Fletcher entered. She was in the middle of a figure, and she finished it. Fletcher, who had been raised to a rank where people looked up when he entered rooms, noticed this. He did not examine his reaction. He assumed, without examining that either, that she was a secretary, perhaps a household assistant, some useful, capable woman employed to manage correspondence and stand between the mistress of the house and the ordinary machinery of daily life. She had that competent, unhurried look about her. A woman who worked for her position rather than inherited it. He set his hat and gloves on the side table. He waited. She finished her column. "I beg your pardon," he said when she at last set down her pen. "I am Lord Dunbar. I believe Miss Pemberton is expecting me." The woman at the desk looked up at him. She had grey eyes, the sort that take in more than they give back, and they moved over him with a calm that was almost disconcerting. "Yes, my lord," she said. "I'll let her know you've arrived." "Thank you." He reached into his coat and found a coin, a shilling, smooth with age, and set it on the edge of her desk. "For your trouble, and have someone bring coffee, would you? The train was cold." She looked at the shilling. Then she looked at him. "Of course," she said. "And here, stop. This is the moment I brought you to witness, and I am not going to let it pass without making absolutely certain you understand it. Lord Dunbar has just tipped a shilling to Adeline Pemberton. He has just told the sole owner of Pemberton and Sons, a woman who employs 400 workers and signs checks that would make most men's hands tremble, to fetch her mistress and see about his coffee. He has set a coin on the edge of her desk, the way you tip a girl at a railway refreshment counter. He has looked at this woman for 30 seconds, assigned her a role and a station, and moved on without a second thought. And she is sitting there, with that shilling bright on the desk before her, watching the door he just walked through, deciding, in this particular still moment, exactly what she is going to do about it. Sit with that, hold it, because what she does next is the whole engine of everything that follows. Now come back with me, just a little way, to who that woman at the writing desk actually was, and why she did not simply stand up and put Lord Dunbar right. Adeline Pemberton had run Pemberton and Sons for 3 years. Since the morning her father's solicitor had read the will to a roomful of astonished uncles and male cousins, and she had sat quietly in the corner and let them be astonished. Her father, James Pemberton, had built the firm from a single warehouse into the largest wool operation in the West Riding over 40 years of work, and he had taught his only child every corner of it. He had not had a son. He had never seemed to consider this a significant problem. "Adeline has a better head for figures than any of you," he had reportedly told one of those uncles during a particularly contentious family dinner. "Why would I hand my life's work to someone who has to start from the beginning?" He had left it to her outright, lock and stock and ledger, and she had run it the way he had taught her, from inside. She sat with the accounts because she understood the accounts. She visited the warehouses because she understood the warehouses. She wore plain dresses because you cannot crouch over a bolt of wool in your Sunday best. And Adeline had decided long ago that she would rather do the real work in the wrong clothes than perform the appearance of work in the right ones. She was, as a result, frequently mistaken for an employee. She had learned to find it instructive. The fortune hunters had started arriving within 6 months of her father's death and had not stopped. The younger sons, the indebted gentlemen, the smooth-mannered men with old names and newer obligations who had heard about the Pemberton fortune, and to enquire after Miss Pemberton with their best expression of earnest admiration ready. Adeline had sat through 3 years of that admiration. She had learned, with a thoroughness that would have broken a less practical heart, to read the particular quality of attention a man pays a woman, when what he actually wants is the company her name is attached to. The way his eyes moved past her to the rooms behind her, the precision of the compliments. Always the same compliments, as if they had all consulted the same pamphlet. "Your father must have been a remarkable man. I have such admiration for a woman of your capabilities. You manage it all so remarkably well." Adeline had stopped believing any of them somewhere around the 18th month. She was not bitter. She was clear-eyed about that distinction. She had too much work she loved, and too many genuine problems she genuinely wanted to solve to tip all the way into bitterness. But she was tired, in the particular way a person gets tired when they have been looked past long enough. When she was being looked at, no one was looking at her. They were looking at the firm, and the warehouses, and the 400 workers, and the account that held then more than most men would see in a lifetime. She had grown quietly and without drama, resigned to the likelihood that she would run Pemberton and Sons until she died, respected, productive, and never once truly known. And then Lord Dunbar's letter had arrived. Civil. Correct. Dull in exactly the way those letters always were. A mutual acquaintance had suggested the introduction. He would be honored to call if Miss Pemberton were amenable, and so forth and so on. She had read it twice, felt the familiar exhaustion settle over her, and very nearly written back to decline. Instead, she had done something she had never done before. She told Mrs. Keene and the rest of the household that Miss Pemberton would unfortunately be occupied with business in Manchester when Lord Dunbar arrived, and would not return for several days. He was to be made fully welcome, given every comfort, treated as a guest of the house, and she, Adeline, in her plain dark dress at her writing desk, would simply be where she usually was, and not one member of the household was to say a word. The household had agreed with an enthusiasm that told her plainly they had been wanting her to do something like this for at least 2 years. And so when Lord Dunbar walked into her hall and set a shilling on her desk and asked her to fetch her mistress, Adeline Pemberton picked up the coin, put it in her pocket, and said, "Of course, my lord," and waited to see who he was. She had not expected to find out quite as quickly as she did. He was not what she had braced herself for, and she noted this, and tried not to let it matter. He was formal, yes. A little cold in the way men of his rank often are, the coldness of someone who has spent 30-odd years having his authority assumed rather than demonstrated. But he was not smooth. That was the thing. The fortune hunters were always smooth. They had their warmth deployed with the reliability of a stage trick, their compliments loaded and ready. Lord Dunbar had none of that. He sat in the guest parlour in the evenings with a book he was not reading, and a glass of port he barely touched, and when Adeline, Susan, she had told the household to call her, a name borrowed from a distant cousin, came in to attend to the fire, he barely noticed. He was, she decided, genuinely distracted, not performing it, genuinely somewhere else. On the second morning she found him in the library at 7 o'clock, standing at the window with a cup of coffee he had forgotten to drink, looking out at the garden as though it owed him something. "You're up early, my lord," she said. He turned. He had that particular look men get when they are caught thinking something they would rather not share. "I don't sleep well," he said. "Is it the mattress? I can have Mrs. Keene." "No, it's nothing to do with the house." He turned back to the window. "The house is very comfortable. I have a matter on my mind." "Ah," she said. She set his cold cup aside and placed a fresh one. "Those are harder than lumpy mattresses." He looked at her, actually looked at her for the first time since he had arrived, with something close to curiosity. "Yes," he said, "they are." She turned to go. She heard him say, almost to the window glass, "Do you know what it is to be in a position where every choice available to you is one you cannot respect?" She stopped. She should have kept walking. She knew, even in that moment, that she should have kept walking. "I think most people do," she said, at one point or another. He was quiet. Then he laughed, low and not particularly happy. "I suppose that's true." She stayed. She told herself she was attending to a guest's comfort. And then she stopped telling herself that because it was not true. She stayed because he had not expected an answer, and she had given him one anyway, and something about his face when she did had made it impossible to leave. Over the next 3 days Lord Dunbar talked to her. Not all at once, not in any planned way. He talked the way a man talks when he has been silent too long and has found by accident someone who listens as though what he says actually matters. He told her in pieces, across the library, at breakfast, and one long afternoon when rain had confined them both to chairs near the fire, about Dunbar Hall and the mortgages and his father's cheerful, catastrophic generosity, about Clement and Hugh, whose trust in him sat in his chest like a stone he couldn't set down, about 4 years of selling smaller parcels and economizing and still, somehow, not managing to get out from under. And then, on the 4th morning, he told her the worst of it. They were in the library again. She had a book she was pretending to read. He was at the window, but differently, less stiff. A man who had started without meaning to settle. "I came here," he said, not looking at her, "to court Miss Pemberton for her money." She kept her eyes on the page. "I know that is not," he continued, measuring each word, "a thing a man says out loud, but I find I cannot sustain the pretense here. Miss Pemberton is in Manchester, you are here, and I am very tired of carrying this by myself." She said nothing. "I have never met her," he said. "I know she is wealthy. I know she is unmarried at 31, and my solicitor implied, with great delicacy, that she might therefore be grateful for a reasonable offer." He paused. "I came down here intending to be charming and attentive, and to make her believe I was genuinely interested in her as a person, rather than in what her name is attached to. I have been here 4 days, and I find I cannot do it, not because I have suddenly become a better man, but because the specific lie, that some woman would spend her whole life believing herself loved by a man who married her balance sheet, seems to me the worst part of it. Not the marrying for money. Men have done worse. The worst part is that she would never know she had been deceived. And I cannot—" He stopped. The fire ticked. Rain ran slow tracks down the window glass. "I have always thought myself an honest man," he said quietly. "It is nearly the only thing my father left me intact." The room was very still. Adeline Pemberton sat across from him, with her book in her lap and her eyes on the page, and she was not reading a single word, because she was listening to a man she had been fully prepared to despise, explain to a woman he thought was nobody, because no one of consequence was watching, that the thing he could not stomach was the deception, not the arrangement. The deception, that some woman he had never met would be wronged by the lie and would never know it, and that her not knowing, her unguarded trust, was the part he could not make peace with. In 3 years not one of them had thought of her that way. Not one had sat in her house and called it wrong. They thought of her as the destination, as the ledger balance with a name above it. This man, at her window in the grey morning, was the first in 3 years who had looked past the company and seen a woman who deserved the truth, even when he believed she would never be in the same room to hear him say it. Adeline looked at her book and felt something shift in her chest. Something she had filed away and locked, and told herself firmly she was better off without. "Perhaps," she said with great care, "you should tell her the truth." He made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Tell her I arrived intending to deceive her and thought better of it at the last moment. She would show me the door." "Maybe," Adeline said. "Or maybe she is a woman who has spent 3 years being wanted for her firm's assets and would find the truth the rarest thing anyone has ever offered her." He looked at her. "That is a very generous reading." "It is a practical one," she said. "You don't know what she has had to manage. Assumptions are easy to make about people you haven't met." He was quiet a long time. Then, "You are a surprisingly formidable person to have met over a desk in someone else's house." "I charge for it," she said. "You've already paid." He blinked. Then he remembered the shilling, and something moved across his face. Not quite embarrassment, but neighboring it, and he said, "I begin to think that was money well spent." He left the library lighter than he had entered it. He always did in those days. And behind him, Adeline sat by the fire and pressed her hand to her sternum and acknowledged, with the bluntness she applied to everything else in her life, that she was in very serious trouble, because the man she had positioned herself to study at a clinical distance had turned out to be the first genuinely honest one in 3 years. He had not performed anything. He had sat down and told the truth to a woman he believed had no power over him and nothing to offer him, because, as he had put it himself, there was no performance required. She had been waiting, without admitting she was waiting, for a man who would not perform. She had nearly stopped believing he existed, and here he was, sitting at her library window in the rain, breaking his own heart over a lie he hadn't even told yet. She had a problem. She knew she had a problem, and she went on having it while Miss Pemberton remained in Manchester and the woman the household now called Susan became the person Lord Dunbar spent his days with. They argued about trade policy one evening until 10 o'clock, at which point Mrs. Keene appeared in the doorway looking pointed, and Lord Dunbar realized he had been debating commodity prices with a household employee for 2 solid hours and could not find it in himself to regret a minute of it. He beat her at chess exactly once on a Tuesday and was so visibly pleased with himself that she let him keep it. She walked him through the garden, her garden, planted over 3 years with her own hands, and he followed with his hands in his pockets and asked real questions. Not polished questions, questions that wanted answers. The coldness left him somewhere in the middle of the first week. The clinical distance left her somewhere in the middle of the second. And Lord Dunbar, who had come to Yorkshire to court a wealthy woman's account book, fell helplessly and with mounting alarm into love with a secretary who didn't have a penny to her name. The word alarm is the right one, because for Fletcher Dunbar this was not a welcome realization. He lay awake doing arithmetic, and the arithmetic was brutal. His family's entire future rested on him marrying money. The money was right here, in this house, waiting for him to present himself to its owner. He had been here 2 weeks, and had spent them falling in love with the wrong woman. Every evening in the garden was another evening. He was not doing the thing he had come to do, and his brothers were writing cheerful letters, full of trusting optimism that he had not the heart to answer honestly. The evening it came to its head was a Thursday, mild for October, the last warmth of the season. They had walked in the garden after dinner, as they had fallen into the habit of doing, and had been quiet a while, and then Lord Dunbar stopped on the path and turned to her in the fading light. "I have to tell you something," he said. "It is going to sound like madness." She waited. "I came here to court Miss Pemberton, and I find I cannot do it, not because she has done anything wrong, but because in 2 weeks of arguing about wool futures and losing at chess and walking in this garden, I have done the one thing I could absolutely not afford to do." He looked at her steadily. "I have fallen in love with you, a secretary, a woman without a penny to her name, the single worst possible choice a man in my position could make, and the only one I seem to be capable of." Adeline went very still. "I have run every version of the numbers," he said, and there was a ghost of dry humor in it that did not reach his eyes. "There is no version that works. My brothers depend on what I do in the next week. My family name is 4 centuries old, and I am about to let it go to the creditors because I cannot stop coming back to this garden." He took a breath. "So I am going to do the most irrational thing I have ever done. When Miss Pemberton returns, I am going to tell her honestly that I cannot court her, and then I am going to come back here and ask you, with nothing on either side, and my family's future on my conscience for the rest of my days, whether you would consider being very poor alongside me. Because I would rather be ruined in the truth than preserved in the lie, even if the lie would have worked, even if no one would ever have known the difference." He stopped. He was looking at her the way a man looks when he has said the most foolish and most honest thing of his life, and is not certain he regrets it. Adeline had her hand against her mouth. She was looking at him, and she understood, with a clarity that was all and almost physical, that she had just heard the answer to the question she had stopped believing anyone would ever get right. He had been offered everything. He had turned from it, freely, knowing exactly what it cost, toward a woman he believed had nothing, because the lie would have saved him, and he could not make himself live inside it. She was the woman in 1,000 he had declared did not exist. She was the heiress whose fortune he had just walked away from for love of her. She was both at once, and he did not know, and she had to tell him now. Before he said anything more, "Fletcher," she said, his name. She had not used it before. "Don't finish that sentence. There is something I have to tell you, and you are going to be angry with me, and you have every right to be." He went still. "My name," she said, "is Adeline Pemberton." The silence stretched out. "There is no Susan," she said. "There never was. I am the heiress you came to court. This is my house, my garden. Those were my invoices on the desk in the hall. I have known who you were from the moment you arrived, and I let you believe I was the secretary, and I listened to everything you told me, and I am more sorry for it than I have words for." She kept her eyes on his face. He deserved that much. The look that went across Lord Dunbar's face passed through several things in quick succession. The shock first, that blank moment before the mind catches up to what the ears have heard. Then the retrograde movement. She could see it happening as he replayed 2 weeks of conversation through the new understanding. Every word he had said to her about the mortgages, about his brothers, about the lie he could not stomach, about the woman he had come to court without knowing her. All of it spoken in reality to that woman, in her own house, in her own garden. 2 weeks, he said, very quiet. You knew every morning. Yes. I told you I had come to deceive you. The muscle in his jaw was working. I sat in your library and confessed the whole of it to you, and you said nothing. You let me believe there was one honest corner in this house. One person it cost me nothing to be truthful with, and it was you. His voice had gone careful in the way voices go when emotion is being very precisely managed. Was any of it real? Or was I being watched, Miss Pemberton? Was that the whole of it? A fortune hunter, performing for the audience he didn't know he had. That is the question at the center of his hurt, and it is the only question that matters to him. Not the money, not the embarrassment, whether any of it was real. She did not flinch. She had promised herself she would not. Yes, she said, at the beginning, that is exactly what it was. He started to turn away. She spoke quickly. I have been hunted for 3 years, Fletcher. 3 years of men sitting across from me, and looking past my shoulder at the company behind me. I stopped believing any man alive could see me. Not the firm, not the inheritance, just me, the woman. When your letter came, I was so tired of being an asset with a face attached that I did a cowardly and defensive thing. I decided to watch you before you could put your best face on. She stepped toward him. And then I heard you. In the library, that 4th morning. I heard a man who had ridden 4 hours to court a fortune confess that the thing he could not live with was the wrong it would do to the woman he was deceiving. Not the dishonesty in the abstract, the wrong to her, to me, and in 3 years not one of them had ever once thought of me as a person who could be wronged by a lie. He had stopped walking. He was not looking at her, but he was not going. The study became real, she said. I cannot tell you the exact morning, but somewhere between the trade argument and the garden, I stopped watching you and started knowing you, and I should have told you then. I should have told you a dozen times before this. I was afraid, not of losing the money. I think you understand by now that the money is mine to do with as I choose. I was afraid of losing the first genuine thing that had come anywhere near me in 3 years. So I put it off, and put it off, until you stood on this path, and offered to throw away your family's future for love of a woman you believed had nothing. Her voice went unsteady. She held it. And I could not let you sacrifice one more thing for a poverty that doesn't exist. The garden was very quiet. An owl somewhere in the old oak near the wall, the last of the daylight going amber in the west. You want to know if it was real, she said. Here is what I know is real. Every word you said in that library was real, because you said it to a woman you believed had no power over you and nothing to give you, and no way of using it against you. You told the truth to no one, and you said so yourself, and you told it to me. And just now on this path, you chose ruin over comfort, with your eyes open, knowing exactly what it cost, certain you were choosing it. She looked at him directly. Do you understand what you have given me? You are the first man in 3 years who chose me when he believed I had nothing. I cannot undo the deception. I will be sorry for it for a long time. But I could not let you walk away believing the loss was certain when only the love was real. She stood before him in the evening dark, and she did not look away. The silence lasted a long time. Then Lord Dunbar said, with the careful precision of a man working through an honest sum, "Let me make certain I have this correctly. An hour ago, I was a ruined man who had just thrown away his family's salvation for a woman he believed to be penniless. And now I am a man in love with that same woman. Not one word she ever said to me changed, not one true thing between us altered, who turns out to be the answer to every difficulty I have. That is the shape of it, Adeline said. And I cannot. He paused, considered. I cannot, even at my most prideful, and I will have that moment, I should warn you, probably sometime before breakfast, accuse myself of having come for the money, because you watched me turn from it. Yes, she said quietly, I did. You did an unforgivable thing, he said. I know. And in doing it, you made it impossible for either of us to doubt what happened here. He let out a long, unsteady breath. We are the only two people in England who know with absolute certainty that this was not about the money. You know it because I chose you without it. I know it because you watched me do it in full knowledge of what it cost. He shook his head slowly. The stiffness was gone from his shoulders. I came here to purchase my family's salvation with a lie, and you have made it impossible. You have handed me back my own honesty. I find I cannot even manage proper fury with you for very long. You are entitled to a reasonable amount of time, she said. I earned it. The corner of his mouth moved, just barely. I want my shilling back, he said. Adeline laughed, the kind of laugh that comes out when you have been holding very tightly to your composure for quite a while and the grip finally gives. She reached into the pocket of her plain dark dress and held it out to him on her palm. She had kept it there every single day for 2 weeks. He looked at it. He looked at her. He closed his hand around hers, the shilling between them. Keep it, he said. It bought me the only honest conversation I've had in 4 years. That makes it the finest investment I ever made without meaning to. He did not ask her formally that evening. He asked her the next morning, in the library, in ordinary daylight, which was how she preferred things done. No drama, no theatre, just the plain truth said plainly, and she said yes before he had finished the sentence. They were married in the spring. The county found the whole thing peculiar. An earl marrying a wool merchant's daughter was unusual enough, but an earl who seemed to have been won over by the woman herself rather than the company, who was seen arguing trade law with his wife over breakfast, and losing those arguments in front of company, and appearing, unaccountably, to be in good humor about it, was simply beyond explaining. Nobody quite understood it. The household of Pemberton House understood it perfectly, and kept the secret to their graves, and smiled with great composure whenever anyone asked. Clement and Hugh adored their sister-in-law, and told everyone who would listen that she was the only member of the family with any real sense, which Lord Dunbar received with equanimity. Because it was true. Dunbar Hall was saved, its old stones secured for another generation, and Adeline always said the saving of it was beside the point, and Fletcher always said she was right about that as she was about most things, and neither of them considered this a point of contention. Adeline never did change her habits. She kept her plain dark dresses and her ink-stained hands and her place at the writing desk in the front hall, and the new fortune hunters, who occasionally came to inquire after the Countess of Dunbar, kept mistaking her for the secretary and being quietly and efficiently redirected. Sometimes with a shilling left on the corner of the desk, which the Countess found funnier every time it happened. The first shilling, the one pressed into her hand by a cold-faced lord who had not looked at her carefully enough, sat on the mantelpiece at Dunbar Hall in a small glass case, next to a card in his handwriting that said only, "Best money I ever spent." And in all their long years together, whenever anyone asked how they had come to marry, Adeline would say simply that a gentleman had made a mistake, and Fletcher would say it was the only mistake he had ever made worth keeping, and neither of them said anything more than that. Come back here, beneath the soft light of the evening star, where every honest heart gets the ending it has earned, even when it has to earn it the hard way. Subscribe to Moonlight at Marlowe, and don't go wandering too far between stories. I am always at the fire, and I never run out of them. And do be careful, won't you, the next time you set a coin in a stranger's hand without looking at her properly first. You never do know who owns the house.